Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for SportsCentury. America walked, some say staggered, through the 60s, full of doubt about the way we were. 3 assassinations stole our innocence. A war raised questions about our government. Campuses rioted and cities burned. Women were on the turn and on the pill, taking off their bras and telling men to stuff it. Some looked to John Wayne for guidance, but he was too busy making movies. Then relief arrived. It came in the form of a cocky, swaggering, easy-riding quarterback who had it and flaunted it, winking at us on the way to the bank and the bedroom. Joe Namath was here to make it better.
Get your motor running, head out on the highway, looking for adventure, and whatever comes our way. Born to be wild, born to be wild.
He was a guy that came along and broke a lot of the conventions. So he was, in a way, like a rebel with a cause. It was like traveling with a rock star. He just was a magnet, attracting people, and mostly young people. And talk about excitement and energy. Wow.
He was the first sports hippie. Guys would come in with the long hair. The hair would stick out under the helmet. They'd have mustaches, the long sideburns. But he was the first guy that was sort of like really cocky.
This living, breathing guy. He drank. He chased girls.
He is the epitome in the 1960s of Hugh Hefner's Playboy man.
Joe Namath. Joe Namath, who likes girls. He enjoys being different, and he enjoys being written about. He's Broadway Joe now, a big shot, and he loves it. He is perhaps the most confident athlete of his time.
Namath's counterculture image was so strong that he was the only athlete on Richard Nixon's enemies list.
Images threaten people. When you go back and look at the situation in the 60s, you can see how people look at Joe and fit him into the counterculture.
Namath's transcendent journey into the cultural firmament began in late 1964, when entertainment mogul and Jets owner Sonny Werblin drafted the Alabama quarterback with an eye to casting him in the lead role of the upstart American Football League.
Sonny was an agent. He knew stars. He knew what made a star, and he could see a star in the making here.
Not that many people in New York knew who Joe was. I mean, he wasn't a Heisman Trophy winner. He wasn't a first-string All-American. You know, people in football knew how good he was, but you knew he was special. There was a look to him. There was the green eyes. There was the slouch. There was the Pennsylvania Southern accent, all things that set him apart. Sonny was a very, very smart, very shrewd businessman, very terrific promoter, and he knew that in Joe Namath he had someone to promote.
Namath lovingly slipped into his role as if it were a new fur coat.
When I first got to New York, I was like that little 5-week-old puppy running around. You ever see a little 5-week-old puppy just looking to get into everything, you know? And I was kind of like that, too. I didn't know about New York. I didn't know what kind of spotlight you're in.
Used to hang around with him. He owned New York, and the rest of us just trailed around and said, oh, good Joe. Let's create some excitement, huh? On the road, wherever you went, he gathered a crowd, and many of them were young, attractive females.
He used to ask women when they approached him, are you married or are you engaged? And if they answered no to that question, well, then all bets were off, and it was a free night for everybody.
We kind of had a routine that we'd meet at the golf course, play golf, come back to the house, we'd have dinner. He'd go home and rest with me to 10 o'clock at night, Playboy Club or wherever it was we were, and we were out till 4 o'clock in the morning.
It seems almost un-American to me for a bachelor not to marry, you know, go around having a drink with a lady now and then. And why all of a sudden that's becoming evil in me, I don't know, but some people don't like it.
You got to understand that I'm a Gemini. I have 2 guardian angels. So sometimes I behave a certain way, and sometimes I get a little bit mischievous. Now, hey, man, I messed up. You know, I did some things that might not have always been the way it should have been, but I never took things for granted. You have responsibilities individually and team-wise, you've got to own up to them.
One act that, on the face of it, would require the work of at least 2 guardian angels came prior to Super Bowl III in January of 1969, when he put himself and his 3-touchdown underdog team way, way out there.
It was here in Miami at a place called Miami Springs Villas. 3 days before the Super Bowl III, Namath had imbibed quite a bit of Johnny Walker Red on the way to a Miami Touchdown Club banquet.
They introduced me, and I get up behind the podium, and this guy in the back of the room just yells, you know, "Hey, Namath, we're gonna kick your behind, you know." Well, hey, wait a minute. I'm up here right now. It's my turn to talk. I got news for you. We're gonna win the game, I guarantee. And that's all there was to that. Wasn't planned.
When he's by the pool in Miami, stretched out, saying, the sun is nice. I guarantee we're going to beat the Baltimore Colts. And we said, what are you, sunstruck, Joe? What are you doing? You crazy?
That Sunday, Namath silenced the doubters as the Jets dominated the Colts. Now, Werblin star rocketed above the sporting landscape to burn brilliantly in the headiest realms of American entertainment.
Well, I understand, Joe, that you've been offered personal appearance engagements, more commercials, more television shows, and even a role in a new movie. Have you made up your mind about any of them?
Well, no, I haven't, Ed. There's been a lot of opportunities come up recently since our victory in the Super Bowl.
No matter what the odds, Joe Namath knows the score.
Okay, Joe, we've only got time for one more play, and we need 6 big ones to win. This is it, Joe.
You mean the bomb?
The bomb.
Okay, on 2.
In Namath's heyday, he even hosted his own TV show. He took this question from audience member and film co-star Ann Margaret.
To what do you attribute your quick release? Is it fear?
2 things. One, excitement, and the other, fear.
Now, I don't wear pantyhose, but if beauty mist can make my legs look good, imagine what they'll do for yours.
Namath successfully flouted every time-honored convention of the American male as hero.
He understood the role. I'm not going to tell you that he didn't enjoy it, because I feel quite sure that he did. But that's not really the essence of Joe Namath.
Let me take over New York. Let me be a star. Let me be Broadway Joe and wear fur coats and go out with movie stars. On the other side is let me be a friend. Let me be loyal. Let me be truthful. And those things somehow did coexist.
I always knew who number 12 was. I always knew he was the guy that wore the pantyhose. I always knew he was Broadway Joe. And of course, he was one of my idols growing up because he was born and raised in Beaver Falls, real close to where I came from. That's one of the reasons I wore number 12.
Preceded by George Blanda and John Unitas, and followed by Joe Montana and Dan Marino, Joe Namath emerged out of the rocky, hard-scrabble soil of western Pennsylvania, where subsistence living was as common as coal dust.
It was a very blue-collar, hard-working area. We had the steel mills and the coal mines. Most of the people were workers, and to pay your way through college was a strain for a lot of folks. And in Western PA, sports was a major outlet.
Born May 31st, 1943, Joseph William was the youngest of John and Rose Namath's 5 children. His father immigrated from Hungary at age 13 and later found work in the steel mills.
Joe grew up in a poor community in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, but it was a varied community. Some of his friends were Hungarian background as he was, some were black.
At 9, Namath met racism for the first time when he and his best friend, African-American Linwood Alford, stopped at a local pizza parlor.
This lady in there, when we went in, she just right away, you get out of here, to Linwood. Right after she said, Joe Namath, you can stay, he got to get out. And I had no idea what she was talking about, no idea. And so we left together. I couldn't understand why she felt that way. Looking back on it years later, I remember, wow, you know, that's what that was.
It was a melting pot right there, just wherever we grew up, and we didn't look at color. Those were our friends.
When Namath was 12, his parents separated, ending what had been a troubled marriage.
I can remember as a 3 or 4-year-old to this day, hearing them downstairs talking or arguing about something, and I was upstairs, and I came to the top of the steps. I was crying because it got me scared.
With his father absent from his daily life, Namath found guidance from his football coach.
He wanted number 19 because Johnny Unitas was his idol. He loved Johnny Unitas.
I marveled at his abilities and his leadership. Joey U was my nickname, Joey U. On the road, I wore 29 because we didn't have a number 19.
After leading Beaver Falls to his first Western Pennsylvania championship in 35 years, Namath chose Alabama from more than 50 scholarship offers. His first encounter with his new coach was on sacred territory.
He had a toothpick behind his ear and a brown-looking hat. And he got out on the field out there. Coach Bryant asked him up on the tower.
He was the only recruit to ever go up in the tower with Coach Bryant. And that amazed all of us, all the players, because no one would dare do that.
But Namath was quick to understand that Alabama was worlds away from the racially diverse neighborhoods of Beaver Falls.
Coach Schnellenberger takes him to the local bus station. And Joe sits down and looks around himself, and he sees the signs, colored water, colored bathrooms, and things like that.
Back then, we were police dogs, we were fire hoses, burning of the crosses and Ku Klux Klan.
I had a picture on my desk, black girl, along with 2 Caucasians. One individual, he pointed at the black girl and asked me, "Is this your girlfriend?" And I thought he was pointing at the other girl. I said, "Yeah."
Joe acquired the nickname nigger. Joe was sort of proud to be called that. And I think the thing was not that he was so sensitive to race, but that he was insensitive to race, that it didn't make any difference.
In May of 1963, Namath witnessed one of the watershed moments of the civil rights movement, as Alabama Governor George Wallace tried to block Vivian Malone from becoming the first black student at the University of Alabama.
We're standing around Foster Auditorium, which is where you register for class. And Governor Wallace, he's standing there in the doorway. And he's saying, "No, I will not allow this student to register." Man, I'm standing from 15, 20 feet or so from him. And the federal man steps in there and says, "Excuse me, Governor Wallace, it's now a federal issue. Step aside, please." And Governor Wallace just stepped aside like he was supposed to. It was a thrill to see Vivian walk through that door. We talked sometimes. You know, he couldn't understand how much pressure she was under at the time.
Namath felt pressure himself, adjusting to life in the South. Still a few years before he would become Broadway Joe, Namath chose a different direction.
I think he was more of a loner than a playboy. We'd go out at nights and we'd stay out a little while and then we'd go back to the dorm. Not that he wanted to be by himself, but he didn't want to be around a big crowd.
However Namath may have been characterized by some Alabama students, he became an instant hero when he tossed 3 touchdowns in the 1962 opener against Georgia. After leading the Crimson Tide to a 9-1 record in his sophomore season, he engineered a 17-0 victory over Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl.
Quick-hitting Bama drives to an early lead on the talented passing of quarterback Joe Namath. Touchdown, Alabama!
During the next season, Namath hinted of his future self by taking a drink.
We went to a fraternity party Saturday night, and I was guilty of breaking a team rule.
And then we left there, and then we went down Sorority Road. We were sitting on the back of this little 2-seat car. And somebody saw us, and they told Coach Bryant.
Coach Bryant, he said, "We're going to have to do something because he is not a prima donna. He's got to go by the team rules that we've set for him." So we had a staff meeting.
I felt like that Coach Bryant needed to get his attention, and I felt like in the best interest of Joe Namath, if he were sort of set down or suspended or wasn't allowed to play, that it would help him in the future.
Now, I promise you, he looked me in the eye and told me this. He said, Joe, the coaches feel that there's a way of disciplining you. One coach believes that you should not be on the team. He said, I feel that way. He said, the rest of my staff feels there's another way of disciplining. He says, I'll let you play, he said, but I'll resign after this year. He looked me in the eye and told me that. And I was said, oh, no, sir, that's fine. You know, I don't want you to do that.
Namath was suspended by Bryant for the last game of the 1963 regular season and the Sugar Bowl.
We absolutely knew and trusted his vision, and whether you liked it or not, whether you thought it was right or not, you trusted him and went along with it.
That was one of the greatest lessons in his life. You know, said if Coach Bryant would have let him play, he thought it would have hurt him. I believe he felt like he had let Coach Bryant down. Joe treated Coach Bryant, looked at him as if it was like a father.
Joe loved Bear Bryant and respected him very much. Bear Bryant had a lot to do with the way Joe is today, as far as character and being honest and truthful.
As a matter of fact, the relationship was so good that Coach Bryant would have him come out to his home for dinner. Miss Bryant just took him like he was a son, and she really babied him, and Joe loved it.
I remember when Coach Bryant passed away, I went to the funeral with Joe, and as we were leaving the cemetery, Joe reached over and put his hand on the casket, and you could see for a moment he was having some kind of conversation.
At the University of Alabama, I was mighty lucky to be working under a gentleman named Paul Bryant. Coach Bryant, Mrs. Bryant, wherever you are, we miss you.
The bow. Resistance becomes strength.
1960, in retrospect, was sort of like a glorified minor league.
Such was still the case in December of 1964, when Namath was at the center of a bidding war between the Jets and the St. Louis Cardinals. Representatives of the NFL team fired first.
They asked me what I wanted. I told them, and they both acted like they had heart attacks, and they fell this way. I was embarrassed, like I was asking too much. But then I had to tell them when they're moaning. I said, excuse me, and a new car, too. You know?
Hungry for a quarterback who could win games and sell tickets, the Jets originally set their sights on Tulsa's Jerry Rome, the nation's leading passer. But they soon learned he lacked the charisma that Werblin envisioned.
All of Rome's answers were, yup, nope. And it was in Sonny Werblin's apartment. So he motioned Weeb Eubank to come into the next room with him. And he said to Weeb, hey, we got to get this kid from Alabama.
I flew down to Tuscaloosa and then to Birmingham and got Joe Namath and Mike Bite, who was going to be his representative, and got him on a plane and took him out to L.A., where they were going to meet with Weeb Eubank and Sonny Werblin.
Almost immediately, Werblin saw Broadway lights in Namath's eyes.
Sonny Werblin, with the Music Corporation of America, had a great eye for talent. And he saw Dean Martin singing in Steubenville, Ohio, and he also saw him in Cleveland, Ohio. And he knew instantly that this guy had all of the things needed to be a star. And when he met Joe Namath, he saw those same qualities.
Mr. Werblin didn't seem like he was a real football person. He believed in a star system. Stars are what brought people in.
Sonny Werblin might have been the first guy to actually say it out loud. Namath, like Joe DiMaggio, had this charisma. People wanted to be around him. They wanted to see him. They would point at him. That's Joe Namath, that's Joe Namath.
Responding to Werblin's star treatment, Namath signed a 3-year deal with the Jets worth $427,000, more than twice what he originally sought.
When Joe Namath got his $400,000, that changed everything. I mean, that was unheard of.
The $400,000 quarterback. Now, what did that do? That transferred the emphasis on achievement to an emphasis on money, on salary, on compensation. Athletes now judge what their appreciation level is by how much money they make.
Werblin immediately began cashing in on his investment, grabbing headlines, while NBC got what it wanted, a big-time leading man for its new television contract. Namath's deal was a bargain at any price.
Sonny Werblin was absolutely right. He should have given him $800,000 because he made the quarterback into the leader of the band. He made the quarterback into a rock star. He made the American Football League into a viable entertainment community to go up with the National Football League.
But before Werblin's supernova could burst on the horizon, it would first have to prove itself to a down-to-earth crew of veterans who saw only red in the face of all that green.
A lot of the older players who had started in the AFL, they thought he was braggadocious. They thought he was a little eccentric. They didn't get along with him.
They couldn't believe it that somebody was going to get that much money. And some guys actually became jealous of him getting all that money. Because in those days, guys were making like $15,000 a year, $20,000. But as time wore on, and they found out what type of person he was, that was gone and forgotten.
In 1967, the Jets finished with their first winning record in franchise history, as their third-year quarterback passed for a pro football record 4,007 yards.
I had done a magazine piece on how good would Namath be in the NFL. And I remember calling NFL people about him. I called Vince Lombardi. And I said, well, Vince, you've seen Namath on film and all that. How good is this guy? And he said, he's almost a perfect passer.
But to a growing fanship, it was an amalgam of attitude and arm that set Werblin's leading man apart.
There's a little bit of a riverboat gambler type of mentality there that I'm going to find a way to beat you not only with my physical skills, but with my mind.
He was absolutely amazing. I've never seen anybody in my life that could scan a field, go from right to left to center to back to center again and right and left and pick out the uncovered man. I think he's the best quarterback I think I've ever seen.
I know Joe would take home maybe a half dozen canisters of film at night during the season. He knew what he wanted to do every time he called a play. And I think that comes from preparation. And sometimes he couldn't wait to get out of the huddle almost to do something.
In '67, we were on the edge of winning a championship. We felt like we had improved that much.
Just 6 weeks after losing to the Raiders in the famous Heidi game, the Jets again pitted their balanced attack against Oakland's crushing defense. This time, it was for the 1968 AFL Championship.
We were there in one of the great games of all time. It was like a movie, and there was this battle going on that was so close, back and forth, back and forth.
I got a concussion in the first quarter, dislocated finger in the second quarter. At halftime, I had a few injections, and these things were tough. There was a lot of pain involved.
At halftime, I even made a comment to the player. I said, now the first half's over. The first half don't count anyway. It's the second half and the last quarter, but you got to win this game to get to the Super Bowl.
Trailing 23-20 late in the fourth quarter, Namath connected with Maynard for 52 yards, putting the Jets on the 6th. But when Namath looked to the end zone on the next play, he saw no one open.
Maynard, he's so wily and sharp. He knew if I were to come back to him, he had to waste some time. See, the timing of the pattern. So after boom, 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 no one's there, I come up and Don just makes his break just beautifully. So that's the game that gave us a major edge going in to play the Colts in the Super Bowl.
I'll never forget, I was in the lobby of the Americana Hotel on the way to the game. And as I started through the lobby, I heard it, cowboy, cowboy. I look around, it's Cosell. He says, cowboy, Big Bubba will break Joe Willie Namath's legs today. And he started to get me mad. And I said, the Jets are going to give him a hell of a game. Oh, he says, cowboy, you're an idiot.
Baltimore has the tools, and so for Earl Morrall at age 34, there will come the ultimate success. Victory here in the Orange Bowl by a score of 38-10. For Joe Namath, at age 24, there are doubtless many successes yet to come.
Cosell's prediction reflected the smart money. Although the leagues had already agreed to merge in 1970, the NFL and most of America looked upon the Super Bowl as an automatic win.
Nobody gave the Jets much of a chance. I mean, this was not a throwaway game, but I think there was a sort of a head in the sand atmosphere around the National Football League. Well, yeah, it's the AFL. Even though we merged with them, they're still the AFL.
A lot of people didn't think the AFL was up to the standards of the NFL, and with this radical young Broadway Joe Namath as quarterback, it was like Muhammad Ali. I'm the greatest, and Namath was.
Besides believing in their quarterback, the Jets found another reason to be confident of victory.
Pete Lammons came up with this, hey, y'all, if we don't stop looking at those films, we're going to get overconfident. And we all laughed and giggled, laughed. There was that feeling on our team, even after having looked at those films, we felt like we could outplay them.
He said, you had us convinced, and we all believed in the game plan. And I also told him, I said, well, you're going to have to play a hell of a game.
While much of the sporting world looked on in shock, Broadway Joe directed the drama with more than a touch of genius.
Namath did something in that game that we'll never see happen again. He called every play, every single play in the game.
Namath was able to handle our blitz. They used Matt Snell a lot against the blitz, but he also threw the ball against the blitz successfully. And our receivers, when they read the blitz, would break off their routes, and he was able to get the ball off.
He did a great job of play calling and hitting his guys, keeping it short, and chewing up the clock.
The one thing that strikes me right away is how little Joe Namath is depending on throwing the ball. On every play, you say, okay, now he's going to throw one downfield, now he's going to do this, and he wouldn't. So as the game went on, my own feeling was it was a great quarterback performance more than a great passing performance.
In the second quarter, the Jets led 7-0 after Snell capped an 80-yard drive by running in from the 4. Meanwhile, the Jets defense so frustrated Earl Morrall that he threw 3 interceptions, his last in the closing seconds of the half on a flea flicker designed for a wide-open Jimmy Orr.
If you believe you won before you play, you got a major problem. And we had a major problem because we had already won that game in our minds when we stepped on the field.
The Jets continued their march in the third period as Namath led 2 drives ending in field goals. Down 13-0, Shula turned in desperation to the only man in the stadium that the Jets, especially Namath, feared.
United gets almost a standing ovation here with these Jets. One of the greatest players in the history of pro football.
His magic, his brilliance, the guy could lift the team. He could bring him back. When Johnny came in the game, I got worried. It was the first time I really got nervous.
I had chills because, you know, you've grown up watching a guy who's a legend.
1958, Johnny Unitas is throwing passes to Raymond Berry in that famous, what's now called the game when the Colts beat the Giants in overtime. Nobody who saw that 1958 game and saw him coming off the bench in the third quarter couldn't help be scared. I just said, oh no.
All of a sudden, this juxtaposition of Johnny Unitas, Hall of Fame quarterback, one of the great players of all time, and this young upstart. The past and the present and the future was a moment that I'll never forget.
Late in the fourth quarter, the sore-armed Unitas took the Colts 80 yards for their only score. It was not to be. Broadway Joe had already written the final score.
The New York Jets are the world champions. There's the final score. The Jets beating the Baltimore Colts 16-7 gives the AFL the first Super Bowl championship.
That afternoon in Miami, the rebellious, flamboyant, $400,000 quarterback had proven his value not only to the Jets, but to the future of pro football.
You're going off the field and thinking, we did it. And whenever I did that, it was kind of a finalization thing. You know, we did it. Finally, the AFL, the New York Jets, we won the championship, and we are #1 in this business. And it was a very special feeling that lasts to this day.
Well, he went up to his dad, and Joe put his arms around his dad and just held him there and cried. He said, "Dad, it was so wonderful."
The minute it was over, of course, the whole situation in pro football changed overnight. This proved conclusively to the public, as well as to themselves, that the two groups were essentially even.
We all cried because the Jets didn't win it, we did. The AFL won it. We won the Super Bowl. Joe just happened to do it for us, but we won it. It was one of the most moving afternoons I think I ever spent in my lifetime.
That June, Broadway Joe's glittering world came crashing down. NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle ordered him to sell his interest in Bachelor's 3, a popular Manhattan watering hole.
It was a tough thing for Rozelle to do. People who had mob connections started to hang out at Namath's bar. Then he said, "Hey, I'm going to suspend you. You got to get out of that bar. You got to sell it."
People were coming in that the league said were not so interesting but undesirable. And I wasn't sure what that meant totally, because no one had ever bothered me or I never saw anything go on.
I know the language they used, and that's their language, is mafia, people like that. I didn't know anything about that. Joe was in shock. He didn't know these people they were making reference to.
He has a stubborn streak. Don't tell me what to do. So it's part of his charm, part of the reason that you like the guy. He snubbed his nose at a lot of the establishment and backed it up.
On June 6th, Namath called a press conference and, for the second time in less than 5 months, shocked the football world.
I've thought about it more than I thought about anything so far that I've ever done. But it's the only right thing to do. The only right thing to do. And so I am retiring. I'm finished. They gave me one ultimatum. Either get out of the restaurant business or I will get suspended from football.
We have no evidence that Joe has been participating in any illegal activities.
Yes, but aren't you guilty of guilt by association? In net effect.
In effect, that's true. That's why I say there must be a double standard for someone in sports.
It was wrong to accuse him for something that everyone had a constitutional right to go into this establishment. He had no way of keeping them out. The solution to the problem was that Pete Rozelle would apologize to his mother and father, who had been deeply hurt by this. And then Joe would give up his interest in the New York Bachelor's 3, but he could keep the rest of them.
The 26-year-old Namath returned to the Jets after 42 days. But life at the top of the NFL would never be quite the same for Broadway Joe.
He was in enormous pain all the time. He wouldn't show it, but he's been in pain most of his life.
He had to love playing football to do it, because it was a very painful experience for him. After the time he got hurt against North Carolina State in college, football was never again a pain-free game for Joe Namath.
In the pros, and he looked almost like Frankenstein moving around. His legs were so bad.
When I first got to know him, when he was still playing the Jets, even then he couldn't get out of the car.
Even when he signed with the Jets, Namath's right knee had loomed as large as his star power.
Nobody really knows the extent of these injuries. Joe signs the contract before he even takes a physical. They sign the contract and have a press conference at Toots Shores in New York.
I told Weeb, the coach, that knee hadn't been looked at yet. He said, we'll take him somewhere and examine him. And I took him to the bathroom. I wobbled his knee around, and I came right out, and I told Sonny, after talking to Joe, we need to have this fixed up. We expect him to play next summer.
So damaged was his knee that it caused Namath to be listed 4F, excusing him from military service during the Vietnam conflict.
As his knees got progressively worse, he literally went to alcohol on his knees. He would get out of bed on a Monday after a game and couldn't walk, and he would need to drink just to ease the pain.
Through mounting pain, Namath still had a few more brilliant performances in him. In 1972, he and Unitas engaged in one last duel in the sun. combining for a record 872 passing yards. Then, 2 years later, with the Jets trailing the Giants 20-13 late in the fourth quarter, Namath played a scene completely out of character.
I noticed that their right linebacker to our left was named Brad Van Pelt. In that kind of a situation, he kind of got really aggressive. And so in calling that play, I also had in mind keeping the ball. If he didn't look super aggressive at the line of scrimmage, I would have handed the ball to Boozer.
I see the hole is not here. So I stop and I'm looking down. And I hear the crowd roar. The son of a gun is limping into the end zone.
When I limped into that end zone, it wasn't my knees, it was my left hamstring. My leg won't stretch out.
Tied at 20 after regulation, Namath hit Boozer from 5 yards out to win the NFL's first regular season game decided in overtime.
He played some days where he could hardly walk. He's got everything going for him. What does he need to do it? He needed to do it because A, he was your teammate, B, he cared about the game, and C, he was loyal, and D, he wanted to prove that he was one of the best quarterbacks ever to play the game.
Continues, Joe Namath heads for L.A., and despite an unceremonious end to his career, Broadway Joe endures, in contrast to the man within. After 7 straight seasons of failing to crack 500, Namath took his leave of New York and slouched toward Los Angeles.
When I see Joe Namath in a Ram uniform at the end of his career, a real sadness comes across my heart. Joe Namath is New York. He's Broadway. He's Super Bowl III. He's in the green and white. He's number 12. He's the Jets. I can't look at him in a Ram uniform.
I had started him, and we're in the 4th game, and we're playing the Chicago Bears on Monday night in Chicago. Joe had thrown 3 interceptions in that first half, and I just decided I had to make a change. At that time, I had this real pain in my heart about it too, but it was just something from a coaching standpoint that I had to do.
By season's end, the curtain rang down one of the most colorful careers in NFL history. But even in repose, the candle power of Joe's star didn't fade.
Today's your Brute Day. It's your lucky Brute Day.
Make every day your Brute Day with Brute by Fabergé.
Today.
Oh, it's going to take a miracle for me to become a good quarterback.
Excuse me, son.
Wow, Joe Namath.
That's right. My car broke down in front of your house.
Since retiring, Namath has been a spokesman for the NFL, ESPN Classic, and CBSSportsline.com, among other enterprises. His fabled bachelorhood ended at 41 in 1984, when he married actress Deborah Mays. Settling in Florida, they raised their 2 daughters, Jessica and Olivia.
He'd get up at wee hours in the morning to make sure both girls' breakfasts were ready, were dressed appropriately. So Joe's life was surrounded around his daughters.
His idea of a beautiful day used to be to take the children to school in the morning, go play 18 holes of golf, and come back and pick up the children.
He did it with the same zest and intensity that he does everything else. I think of the old Joe Namath bouncing around Broadway. That was one Joe Namath, and the one today is, you know, intensely dedicated to his family.
But what seemed like a blissful afterlife turned bitter. Joe and his wife divorced in 1999.
She changes her name legally 3 times. She goes from Deborah, a good American name, to Tatiana, a Russian name. And she's more into the Beverly Hills kind of thing. And she's thinking of going back there, and eventually she does. She just picks up and goes and meets a plastic surgeon over there and takes up with him. So Joe files for divorce, and a female judge awards him the custody of their 2 kids. And the girls start missing their mother, and they too want to be in Beverly Hills. So they ask him, can we move with Mom? And this hit him like a Mack truck. And he gives it his blessing, but since then he's been pretty depressed.
Joe is going through a very tough time in recent years. None of us goes through a divorce easily, but I think for Joe it was probably harder than for most of us because he waited so long to make a decision to choose the woman he wanted to be his wife. He waited a long time to have children. He was and is wildly in love with his daughters.
What else would you give your life up for? My children, your children, who's ever, you don't flinch, right? I mean, you sacrifice your life for your children.
It's been difficult. Some of the things that he's dealing with, you know, will test his mettle and test his strength. I know that he'll find the strength to get through it and be just fine, but it's not easy.
In 1985, Namath was enshrined in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, despite completing only 50% of his passes and not being ranked in the top 15 in any major passing category. But it was guts, not stats, that defined Joe Namath.
The Super Bowl victory politically made it possible for him to go in the Hall of Fame because there was a lot of sentiment among writers that Joe didn't belong in the Hall of Fame.
Joe Namath is not the greatest quarterback to ever play football, but Joe may have played the most important game to ever be played in football. And for that, you're going to pass by his bust in Canton, Ohio.
I almost feel cheated. It was like it was a flower that was not wilting, but not allowed to bloom any further. There could have been more. But if you're that special, sometimes they don't allow you to be that special forever.
Athletes come along and they are of their time. And Namath was perfect for that time and had that special, sweet moment in time that made him very special and someone who'll be remembered forever.
People are going to remember me the way they want to remember me, and some know me and some don't. I'm just beginning the third quarter of my life. I look at football and life in a similar way. A lot of games are won and lost in the third and fourth quarter. Well, I plan on living to be 100 or so. So I know I've got some things to do down the road, and I'm looking forward to that.
His name was Dave Costa. He was a Broncos defensive tackle. He stood outside the training room and asked, "Is he all right?" Honest to God, I didn't mean to hurt him. The object of his concern was Joe Willie Namath, whose rib cage had been caved in by Costa's helmet. Asked why he took such a burning interest in the enemy, Costa replied, for an entire league, all that Joe was meant to us, whipping the Colts' butts the way he did, he's the reason a lot of us are making decent money. Dave Costa recognized history when he saw it. For SportsCentury, I'm Chris Fowler.